Hello everybody, this is Richard Stashy from Tinker to Tales, and this is a video I'm going to try to analyze the foreword and chapter 1 in Lolita. I personally believe that the foreword and chapter 1 are two parts of one whole entire chapter. I also have many questions about the foreword himself. And because I kind of suck at reading things, and the foreword does say many very big stuff. I decided to have Jeremy Irons from the Lolita audiobook. I'm going to have him do the narrations of the foreword, and I'm going to try to inject my thoughts per paragraph of what's going on, and we'll see how this works.
Lolita, or the Confession of a White Widowed Male. Such were the two titles under which the writer of the present note received the strange pages it preambulates. Humbert, their author, had died in legal captivity of coronary thrombosis on November the 16th, 1952, a few days before his trial was scheduled to start. His lawyer, my good friend and relation, Clarence Choate Clark, Esquire, now the District of Columbia Bar, in asking me to edit the manuscript, based his request on a clause in his client's will, which empowered my eminent cousin to use his discretion in all matters pertaining to the preparation of Lolita for print. Mr. Clark's decision may have been influenced by the fact that the editor of his choice had just been awarded the Poling Prize for a modest work, Do the Senses Make Sense?, wherein certain morbid states and perversions had been discussed.
All right, on this paragraph we learned that the book is called Lolita, or the Confessions of the White Widow Male. We also learned that Humbert, the author of the book, has died during legal captivity by coronary thrombosis. I believe it's just basically a heart attack, or something involving with the heart attack in 1952. This date is kind of important. It also says that it's a few days before his trial was scheduled to start. Now, this becomes very important because it sets us up to think that the writer of the book wrote this book while he was in captivity. He has a trial coming up, and before it was actually scheduled, he died from a heart attack. The book also tells us that the foreword is the editor of the book, and if you check out towards the end of the sentence, he also kind of boasts about his writing abilities, since he is the editor of the book. And then it says, Mr. Clark's decision may have been influenced by the fact that the editor of his choice, which is him, he's the editor of the choice, had been awarded the Poling Prize for a modest work. And he sees what he have done, or he's claiming it's considered like a modest work for his prize. And the work that he's done is Do the Senses Make Sense? With a question mark, which kind of make me feel that this is more like a parody on the word senses itself. And then the ending part of that sentence goes as, wherein certain morbid states and perversions had been discussed, which means that he and the other guy actually talked about the issues in the book itself. And actually, that's my entire takeaway of what I've read out of this.
My task proved simpler than either of us had anticipated. Save for the correction of obvious solecisms and a careful suppression of a few tenacious details that, despite H.H.'s own efforts, still subsisted in his text as signposts and tombstones, indicative of places or persons that taste would conceal and compassion spare, this remarkable memoir is presented intact. Its author's bizarre cognomen is his own invention, and of course, this mask, through which two hypnotic eyes seemed to glow, had to remain unlifted in accordance with its wearer's wish. While Hayes only rhymes with the heroine's real surname, her first name is too closely interwound with the inmost fibre of the book to allow one to alter it. Nor, as the reader will perceive for himself, is there any practical necessity to do so. References to H.H.'s crime may be looked up by the inquisitive in the daily papers for September to October 1952. Its cause and purpose would have continued to remain a complete mystery had not this memoir been permitted to come under my reading lamp.
All right, this is a doozy of a paragraph. He shortens Humford's name as H.H. And he also mentions that the heroine's name, her ending name, Hayes, was chose upon because it rhymes with the surname. Now, that, I guess, kind of suggests that the author of the foreword was involved with changing her name to Hayes. Once again, it doesn't really tell you what the crime that H.H. have done so far, but it did tell you that if you want to know more about the crime, you can look up in the papers. According to the audiobook, it says October to September. According to the copy that I own, and I own a paperback dating from 1959, it says only September 1952. So I guess after the Lolita movie that Stanley Kubrick done, they decided to add October to September as part of the date of that line. It seems really odd, but that's the really huge difference that I've noticed between the book and the other versions that I saw. And basically this seems kind of like a little bit of the legalese end of it, although it does kind of mentions that the that there's like this book is also kind of like engrossing, or I guess as the author of the foreword has said, hypnotic in the story itself. So I kind of believe that this foreword is trying to set the reader up into like, oh, you gotta really check out these words, what he's saying, so to speak.
For the benefit of old-fashioned readers who wish to follow the destinies of the real people beyond their true story, a few details may be given as received from Mr. Windmuller of Ramsdale, who desires his identity suppressed so that the long shadow of this sorry and sordid business should not reach the community to which he is proud to belong. His daughter, Louise, is by now a college sophomore. Mona Dahl is a student in Paris. Rita has recently married the proprietor of a hotel in Florida. Mrs. Richard F. Schiller died in childbed, giving birth to a stillborn girl on Christmas Day, 1952, in Grey Star, a settlement in the remotest Northwest. Vivian Darkbloom has written a biography, My Q, to be published shortly, and critics who have perused the manuscript call it her best book. The caretakers of the various cemeteries involved report that no ghosts walk.
And in the last line, I'll repeat it, it says, the caretakers of the various cemeteries involved reported that no ghosts walk. I feel like it's kind of referring to that people that are really, really involved with the story are not around to talk about it, or maybe to be harmed by the story, or maybe to be around to verify the truths of the story. Interesting, though, on this paragraph, it also mentions that that it kind of like puts in quote marks as for real people, and put in quote marks for true as for true story. And then it says it's that Mr. Windmuller of Ramsdale has the records for everything that you want to find out. And sure enough, this paragraph also has a list of a whole bunch of names. Most likely, you're not going to really remember these names, although these names are also part of the book itself. Especially Richard F. Schiller, or Mrs. Richard F. Schiller. Now, I'm hoping that everyone that is listening to me picking apart the foreword and the chapter 1 has already read the book, because I'm going to end up spoiling it right now. Mrs. Richard F. Schiller is Dolores Hayes in the book. And according to this paragraph in this book, she died in childbed, giving birth to a stillborn girl on Christmas Day in 1952 in Gray Star, a settlement in the remote Northwest. Now, I think this is very, very important, and it also makes me question the forward himself. It's trying to say, like, well, the person that was really, 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 really damaged by this book is dead, so therefore everything's okay. Basically, we could have no problems getting this book published. That's one part of it. Although the other part is that, is it really what's going on? Okay. Yeah, it's a lot to think about in this paragraph, but I do think that the last sentence in the line talking about the that no ghost walk is just basically telling us that everybody that's involved in the book is gone, and they're not there to answer anything about the book or even verify the book itself. Just something to add.
Viewed simply as a novel, Lolita deals with situations and emotions that would remain exasperatingly vague to the reader had their expression been etiolated by means of platitudinous evasions. True, not a single obscene term is to be found in the whole work. Indeed, the robust Philistine who is conditioned by modern conventions into accepting without qualms the lavish array of four-letter words in a banal novel will be quite shocked by their absence here. If, however, for this paradoxical prude's comfort, an editor attempted to dilute or omit scenes that a certain type of mind might call aphrodisiac, see in this respect the monumental decision rendered December 6, 1933 by the Honourable John M. Woolsey in regard to another, considerably more outspoken book, one would have to forego the publication of Lolita altogether, since those very scenes that one might ineptly accuse of a sensuous existence of their own are the most strictly functional ones in the development of a tragic tale tending unswervingly to nothing less than a moral apotheosis. The cynic may say that commercial pornography makes the same claim. The learned may counter by asserting that H.H.'s impassioned confession is a tempest in a test tube, that at least 12% of American adult males, a conservative estimate according to Dr. Blanche Schwartzman, verbal communication, enjoy yearly, in one way or another, the special experience H.H. describes with such despair. That had our demented diarist gone in the fatal summer of 1947 to a competent psychopathologist, there would have been no disaster. But then neither would there have been this book.
Sorry you guys hear my dog is snoring very loud, so I guess it is what it is, as they say. I guess she does need that CPAC machine one day. All right, so this chapter actually made me do a little Google searching. First off, I looked up this Dr. Blanche person, and there is no actual person. This is definitely a fictitious person that's made up. Although one person kind of mentioned that Blanche and Schwarzmeyer kind of reference black and white, white and black. Um, so, and then I just love the way how it says a verbal communication. Therefore, there's nothing in writing that that the forward had with this other doctor about this coming up with this 12% of American adult males. Since there's no verbal writing, there's nothing. It's just a verbal communication. There's nothing really written there. There's really nothing to really go by this percentage numbers. It's kind of like grabbed out of nowhere, just basically grabbed from thin air. The other reference that I looked up was the December 6th, 1933 by the Honorary John M. Woolsey. Now, this is an actual event that really did happen. It's called the United States versus the one book called Ulysses. And apparently there was a whole entire constitutional argument on the Indecency Act and I guess being sent through the mail. And they found out, well, according to the argument, it's just basically that the book Ulysses is not considered a porno, so therefore there's nothing illegal about being sent through the mail. I will put the link down if you guys want to read about it. But that, so it's just trying to say that this book is not like a pornographic book. And I feel like it's playing in the minds of the reader, like, oh, but it seems like it because everything else suggests that it is. And to be honest, it's not really what you think it is. My takeaway of the book Lolita is it, and I don't even. And what's really odd is that I feel that it went over a lot of people's heads about the book itself. I do see it as a mystery book, but I don't see it as a mystery in a sense as a whodunit. I see it more as a mystery in a sense of trying to decipher what is Humphrey telling the truth and what is he telling lies about. And it works your mind as like a critical thinker, and you kind of like analyze a lot of things. And naturally, a lot of people say when you're reading this book, you're going to end up reading it at least 2 or 3 times. The first time when you read it, you think of it going one way, and then after you finish reading the story, you'll find out that it mentions XYZ towards the end, and then you're like reading it again to really catch the XYZ that it's talking about. But I feel like this XYZ thing is more like the shell game that it's playing. What's really going on is like what is really going on is that this Humphrey character, he wants to tell you his crimes. He really does. But he also wants to make it sound like that he's a victim of circumstance.
This commentator may be excused for repeating what he has stressed in his own books and lectures, namely that offensive is frequently but a synonym for unusual. And a great work of art is, of course, always original, and thus, by its very nature, should come as a more or less shocking surprise. I have no intention to glorify H.H. No doubt he is horrible, he is abject, he is a shining example of moral leprosy, a mixture of ferocity and jocularity that betrays supreme misery, perhaps, but is not conducive to attractiveness. He is ponderously capricious. Many of his casual opinions on people and scenery of this country are ludicrous. A desperate honesty that throbs through his confession does not absolve him from sins of diabolical cunning. He is abnormal. He is not a gentleman. But how magically his singing violin can conjure up a tendresse, a compassion for Lolita that makes us entranced with the book while abhorring its author.
Okay, this chapter kind of like, in my opinion, seems to be doing two things. It kind of poking jabs at H.H., making him sound like a very diabolical person, as well as trying to say that this book itself is a very beautifully written book, kind of like in art, but this guy that wrote it is so unhinged that it's just very awe, or as the forward kind of thinks that he's kind of like impressed. At least that's my impression from it. And I feel like this is more or less the forward of the book being very flattered by doing the editing for this book. I think flattered would be a good word for it. Definitely, you guys, if you have any other opinions on what would be more appropriate, just please list it in the comments. I'm always open. I do want to point out that I'm not a professional reader. I'm not a professional analyzer, but I have written a few books myself, and when I do read a book, I kind of like look at the book as if I was the author, what would be the steps I would use. And at least that's my take of it, and that's why I don't really read a lot of books. But when I do, I really try to get the ones that I really, really want to read for just analyzing and understanding the process of the book itself.
As a case history, Lolita will become, no doubt, a classic in psychiatric circles. As a work of art, it transcends its expiatory aspects, and still more important to us than scientific significance and literary worth is the ethical impact the book should have on the serious reader. For in this poignant personal study there lurks a general lesson. The wayward child, the egotistic mother, the panting maniac. These are not only vivid characters in a unique story, they warn us of dangerous trends. They point out potent evils. Lolita should make all of us, parents, social workers, educators, apply ourselves with still greater vigilance and vision to the task of bringing up a better generation in a safer world. John Ray, Jr., Ph.D., Whitworth, Massachusetts, August 5th, 1955.
All right, in this paragraph, the forward is telling you that the book is going to be a classic work as for art, classic for doctors to be talking back and forth about it, and it's going to have a very huge impact. It also wants to tell you, the forward is trying to tell you that he believes that this book is going to be a lesson. We're going to learn from this book. We're going to learn what is going in the mind of a maniac. And we're going to try to learn from this and make sure that we tell others, the innocent, and in this case for the book itself, like the targets are minors, female minors, to watch out for these crazy maniacs. Make sure that the parents know what's going on too, so these things won't happen. Now, in this final paragraph, it also mentions that I'll try to read this thing and hopefully not butcher it. It says, in the ethical impact the book should have on the serious reader. And I feel like this is kind of like a little jab on all readers, because it's trying to say, like, unless you're a serious reader, you're not really going to get this. And if you don't get this, you're not a serious reader. That's how I'm relaying this little passage. Now, I think Jeremy Irons did a very good job doing the narration of the foreword as well as reading the book itself. But unfortunately, I kind of feel that in some cases, I think it went over his head a little bit, in my opinion. I just wish I had the ability to go back in a time machine, because I would love to ask Vincent Price to read the foreword. Maybe read the entire book too. I mean, I just, it's not that I just love Vincent Price's voice. I do think that he has a huge understanding of the macabre. And this book itself is very, very horrific in many sense. And also Vincent Price has a good understanding of a little bit of a comedy. And I feel that this book is also kind of written in a very comedic tone. While reading the foreword, I get a lot of hints of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in the way of the words have been written out, especially when you have like little things like saying, does the senses make sense, or just basically saying things like that no ghost walk. I mean, it just seems like a little bit of a dry humor of comedy going on here, which kind of makes sense when you're watching the 1962 Lolita movie by Stanley Kubrick. It does play off as a dark comedy in many senses, and this forward also kind of leans towards that little bit of a comedy, what's going on. Definitely a very dark comedy. Now, in the audiobook, it does have a little bit of a music going on there, and I was thinking to myself, like, well, it's a very, very short passage, and like I said, I kind of believe that the foreword as well as chapter 1 are both, should be considered both chapter 1, and the huge reason that I'm thinking that the foreword should be part of the chapter 1 is because this Humphrey character is not really a real person, and the foreword itself is not a different author. It's all basically all the same author, and in this case, the foreword is just trying to set up the reader into looking at the book at the perspective that the foreword wants to tell you how to look at the book. See, that's the key thing I want to point out, is that my takeaway about the foreword is that the foreword is telling the readers how you should read this book and how you should view Humphrey. And in some cases, I do feel that the foreword is kind of correct on it, but in other cases, I just feel like the foreword is being a little bit too correct on it, and it's also misleading the reader into their thinking. I do want to start that I think Miss M did a very, very, very good job with her analyzing the chapter 1, and I'm just adding to my thoughts to this. I'm not trying to compete against her thoughts, and I know she's not trying to compete against my thoughts. And I do notice that while she was talking about Lolita, she was holding back on a lot of things because she didn't want to, spoil some of my thinking. And like I said, she's really good in keeping secrets, which I admire a lot. And I'm hoping that I could just free her up by exposing some of my thoughts in the chapter 1 itself, and therefore we could start moving on forward and really picking the book as well as picking the movie apart. And once again, when I was watching the Stanley Kubrick Lolita movie, I did notice the signs of an unreliable narrator happening, and a lot of like, well, what's going on behind the scenes, kind of inspired me into reading the book itself. Kind of. I think the huge takeaway was is that when I was looking up the book itself, and then I was trying to analyze what's going on, and the problem that I was running into was the band-aids. I was just really trying to figure out the band-aids itself and what is its relationship with the movie, and then checking out some of these continuity differences or locations, oddities in the movie itself that points out that there's a lot of the locations are actually in Europe, and it's not in the United States, because Stanley Kubrick filmed Lolita in Europe instead of the United States, which is true. But I also feel that maybe there was a reason behind that, since Humphrey is such a unreliable narrator. The question comes to mind, like, did he really go to America? Did these crimes really happen as he explains what it happens? Or is this just something coming off the top of his mind? As I mean, it's quite possible that he's like sitting home drinking a lot of whiskey in the kitchen table and just coming up with this wild story, and then just ends up writing it down, and then a friend of his picked it up and decided to publish it and say, like, well, this is a crime, this is a lesson to learn, and then try to make a big bestseller out of it. I mean, these are a lot of questions, and what makes this Lolita Nabokov book so unusual is that we know that Humphrey is an unreliable narrator, even in the first chapter. But the question is, like I said before, is that we don't know the depth of his lies, or is there any really truth in here? And the foreword himself is also not relatively honest in some ways. I mean, the foreword is definitely very vain. The foreword is talking very highly about the book, and the huge takeaway too about the foreword is that it doesn't really tell you the crime that Humphrey has done. So keep that in mind. What we're going to end up talking about in this first chapter. All right, the first chapter. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. All right, so the first sentence packs a little bit of a punch. It starts off by saying Lolita, and Lolita is the pet name for Dolores. All right, and then it continues and says the light of my life. Now, light of my life is a idiomatic expression that refers to the most beloved person in one's life. But the question now is, does this have any real meaning to HH? And this is where it doesn't. Because not only that it comes out and says, like, the light of my life, but it turns out that the light of my life is a joke to HH, because he follows that line with the fire of my loins. And HH is talking about being sexually aroused. Now, the other takeaway is that through the book itself, he does do a lot of references, calling her Lolita, Doris, his little pet, his little sex toy. Please keep that in mind. So when he's using that word Lolita, he's not calling Dolores as a person. He's calling out his little pleasure, his little toy. That's what he sees her as. All right, this is going to get a little darker. HH then follows that sentence with my sin, my soul. Now, I kind of believe that my sin he's referring to is his twisted thoughts. H knows that they are bad. He talks about others doing something similar to what he's doing, but he is always saying that those people are worse because the girls that they are messing with are much younger than his targets. It's just something to keep in mind. As for my soul, I really believe he's talking about his sexual unit. All right, the next line in the first chapter, okay, he says, Lolita, and it says, the tip of the tongue, taking a tap of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 onto the teeth, Lolita. Now, I feel like this entire line is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It doesn't really mean anything. He's just basically breaking the words apart and just coming up with his own little thoughts about how to say the word or how the word just fits. I also feel like it's one of those things like that when people don't have any ideas or something else to add to it, they just fill up something into the blank, maybe a little a scribble. I don't really think, and this is the whole entire interesting thing about the story itself. It's just that I don't think he really has anything really good to say about anything, so he just decides to put this little line in there. And naturally, you guys probably hear my dog really snoring now. All right, I'm going to try to read this second paragraph without any interruptions in it, and then I'll cue my thoughts about it afterwards. She was low, playing low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Doris on the dotted line, but in my arms she was always Lolita. Now, I feel like this is kind of like a little jab to the question of the Sphinx, of the stages of man, and I feel like this is kind of like touching on that. I'm not relatively sure itself, but is it his confession that he loves her? Well, he is actually acknowledging that Doris on the dotted line is her real name, and as for the dotted line, that's a reference to where you signed your name in. Dolly at school is like her friends would probably call her Dolly. Lola in slacks is probably when it's going leisure. And then low, I'm not relatively sure about low. Low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. I know the 4 feet 10 is definitely a reference trying to acknowledge that she's 12 years old by her height. Standing in one sock kind of also characterize her as a very unorganized girl. It just gives you a kind of an image of a very young, immature type of girl that he's attracted to. And then, but in my arms, she's always Lolita. Once again, Lolita is his pet name, not Dolores. So therefore, so is he really talking about the girl herself, or his image of what is Dolores is supposed to be? All right. Now the third paragraph is a whole lot of nothing and a huge something. Okay, as I was explaining to Miss M, keep your eyes on that last sentence in the third paragraph. I really think this tells you a lot of what's going on. And as for a lot of nothing, well, it it says a lot of stuff what's happening, but it doesn't relatively says too much of everything else. I mean, well, let's start. Let me just go ahead and start reading it. Okay. Did she have a precursor? She did. Indeed, she did. In point of fact, there might have been no Lolita at all had I not loved one summer a certain initial girl child in a princedom by the sea. Oh, when, about as many years before Lolita was born as my age was that summer. You can, and then he ends it as, you can always count on a murderer for a fancy pose style. Now, what's interesting is that he's trying to say that his habits, the issues that he came to him for many long years ago. This is something that didn't just happen. He was just a victim himself by this, from a certain love from a similar girl many years ago by the sea. And he's trying to say that he's just trying to recapture this feelings that he had many years ago with this other girl that he views as Lolita, which is Dolores. But then he ends the paragraph as, you could always count on a murderer for a fancy pose style. Now, my takeaway about this is that he's being very condescending, as well as being very boastatious or bragging about his ability to use the words, how his ability to twist things around. He's telling everybody up forward that he is a murderer. Now, once again, when you go through the forward, it doesn't say anything about the crime at all. Now, this is the first time we actually acknowledge, like, oh, he's a murderer. When you're going through the forward, it kind of leans off that he has a perversion going on there, a perversion that's very sick, very twisted, that needs to warn people about. But it doesn't tell you what the perversion is. It doesn't tell you that his crimes are involved with murder, or in some cases even messing around with a minor. It doesn't say anything like that in the forward. All the forward says is that there's a crime that you could basically look it up in the daily papers and it'll tell you about. And the forward also kind of hints off that it says the cause and the purpose would have continued to remain a complete mystery, which would mean that you wouldn't actually know that whatever the crime that happened in September of 1952, and like I said, in my copy it just says September 1952, but in September 1952, you would not really relate to that crime done by H.H. Humphrey. And then going back into chapter 1, talking about the third paragraph, this is basically when we find out that he's a murderer. At least that's what he's saying, he's a murderer. And we also understand that when you really read into this sentence here, you also know that he is not only telling you that he's a murderer, but he's also telling you that he's going to be very, very poetic with his words. And I think like I said, I feel like a little bit of a brag going on there, that not only that he wants to tell you that he's doing a crime, that he's done a crime, but he wants to brag about it. He wants to tell you about that he did these crimes. And through the course of the book, there's going to be a lot of things he's going to mention. He's not really going to tell you that he did these crimes. He's going to just mention these incidences, and then I guess, if finger quote, if you're a serious reader, you might actually pick up what he's mentioning and then consider like, oh, these are actually crimes. All right, this is going to be a little bit of a short jump. I'm going to jump to chapter 8 and talk about this one sentence here. In this chapter, he's with a girl called Valeria, and this is what happens. Okay, he says, after the brief ceremony at the Marie, I took her to the new apartment I had rented, and somewhat to her surprise, had her wear, before I touched her, a girl's plain nightshirt that I had managed to flinch from the linen closet of an orphanage. Now, he doesn't tell you why he took the nightshirt from the linen closet from the orphanage, but he's actually bragging that he's making her wear a nightshirt that he took from the orphanage. And if you're this serious reader, you would also ask questions of like, what is he doing in this orphanage? What else did he take? Why did he take it? Is there something else going on? Why did they let him in this orphanage? Did he sneak around in orphanages all the time? And these are the things that he does. So that's why I'm trying to say that, yes, he is bragging about what he does. And in paragraph 3 of chapter 1, he's basically bragging that he is a murderer, and he's very good with words. All right. I also want to add that in that last line saying you can always count on a murderer for a fancy post style, I feel that this is also a slap in the face on the reader. And this is how abusive Humphrey is. He literally is telling you all this nice stuff, and then he just goes ahead and smacks you right in the face, saying like, it's nice because that's the way I am. I'm that damn good. All right. Now, in the last paragraph is very interesting. Definitely has two sentences in there, and Miss M did a really good job covering the last sentence, but we're going to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, exhibit number 1 is what the seraphs, the misinformed, simple, noble-winged seraphs, envied. Look at this tangle of thorns. Now, like I said, Miss M did a really good job in the look at this tangle of thorns. I took it upon that my feeling is like everything is like tangled up, and thorns is just making it very hard to untangle. But there's something else. The seraphs is a very interesting word that he puts in there. And to begin with, it starts off saying that ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Now we're assuming that he's addressing this book to the jury, right? That's what this book is kind of like being told to us. But I kind of feel like this book is not really meant for a jury in the court to read, because I don't think that the jury is going to be sitting down there reading this entire book. I don't think the prosecuting and the prosecutor is going to at least try to prosecute this book, and the defendant's going to have a hard time using this book as evidence beyond hearsay. At least this is how I feel about it. So I think this is part of the shell game that's just telling everybody that of the jury itself, but I also think that it's a play on words. It's not really the jury as in the jury of court. I think it's the whoever's reading the book, that you, the reader, you're gonna be the jury. You're gonna decide your thoughts of it. At least that's what he's trying to bring out. And then he also includes the seraphs. Now, this is the beautiful thing about having Google and the internet, because I myself kind of ran across this word at least a couple times in my lifetime, but not really much. But they're basically angels, and according to my understanding, and I'm just going to talk about the Christian version of it, these are kind of like angels standing right next to God's throne. These are like, I guess in heaven, God is sitting at the throne, and right next to him are these angels, these protectors for him, which is a lot to think about. On does God really need these type of protectors? But he also includes that they are misinformed, and they also envied him, and I feel like this is him saying. This is Humphrey Humphrey's way of saying that he has a God complex. He views that his thoughts, his emotions, his feelings are very complex to even the more complex, even to God himself would not really understand. And yet they themselves will envy him because they themselves marvel in his type of behavior. At least this is how I feel about it. I feel that this is him indicating this God complex, and which also brings a very serious point. I forgot who I talked to about on this, but he kind of linked that the tangle of thorns could probably be reference to the crown of thorns that Jesus was wearing. Once again, he himself, Humphrey feels that he is God. He has this God complex, and the tangle of thorns, the crown of thorns that Jesus was wearing, is this little reference to that. So it's a lot to think about. Now, like I said, when reading the book itself, the mystery is trying to figure out the difference between the truth and the lies. And I strongly believe that the book is loaded with lies, but it's also loaded with a lot of truths in there that's disguised as lies. And it's really hard to decipher, I guess, in a very easy way, and therefore you end up getting a pen, post-it notes, and you end up going through the book itself, bit by bit. Anyway, those are my thoughts about the foreword and chapter 1. Now, I do like to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on the comments. Please write them down. I'm always happy and open to talk about it. Am I going to do another breakdown with the entire book? I don't really think so. I just wanted to bring this out of the open before I actually start talking about the Lolita movie. Well, anyway, I want to say thanks for listening to me rambling for almost an hour. This is Richard Stashy from Tinker to Tales. Please post your comments down, and hopefully it won't be too long before the next video.